Working Cows Podcast, Episode 73.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast. And I don't normally do this, but I'm going to make an exception today. If you would please help me out by voting for the Working Cows Podcast at workingcows.net/vote. As of right now, that's going to forward to a link on my page until the voting page for the Working Cows Podcast is up in the My Roadcast contest. If we win something here, it would be a People's Choice Award probably, and that will give some exposure to regenerative agriculture as a whole. So please check out workingcows.net/vote, and if it doesn't forward you directly to the voting page, keep checking back there until it does, and then cast your vote for the Working Cows Podcast. So I will share with you a little piece of what I've put together for that contest later on in the episode. But for now, check out workingcows.net/vote and vote there for the Working Cows Podcast. Now, on to our topic for today. We are joined by Christine Sue of PastureMap. She's got a fascinating story, and I will link to all of her various appearances on other podcasts where she gives a little bit more of her backstory in the show notes page for today's episode, workingcows.net/73. But for now, just suffice it to say that Christine has created a very cool app that is serving a lot of ranchers. A lot of guests of the Working Cows podcasts are using PastureMap in order to plan their grazing. So for now, Christine, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
I'm super happy to be here.
So I had a chance to meet you. Dallas Mount invited me down to sit in on the Ranching for Profit school that you guys were attending as a team from PastureMap. How many people did you take from the team there?
We took 5.
And what was the impact of attending that as a team?
Oh, it was great. I mean, a lot of our customers actually come from Ranching for Profit, and we're aware that they think differently from sort of more mainstream producers. But going through that whole process was really eye-opening, like how many paradigms just get shattered in a week. So, plug for Ranching for Profit. It was awesome.
And you got to sit there and watch people's paradigms get shattered, right?
Totally.
And what was your training background as far as ranching and your exposure to the ranching industry before that? And then also if you could speak to that for some of your team members as well.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is I got into grazing management when I was studying in earth systems at Stanford. And the reason I got into it is because I had food allergies growing up, and then I had to source directly from local farmers and ranchers. So I've always been grateful to them for producing the food that feeds me and my loved ones, but I had no idea what went into it. And so I went and apprenticed myself after a career in data analytics, which we can get into. I decided to go apprentice myself at a 60-cow dairy, and then I followed a bunch of New Zealand shepherds around the high country in South Island, New Zealand, and then got a degree in pasture management. I find this world to be endlessly fascinating. And then a couple of my team members, we have pretty diverse backgrounds. Another team member of my co-founder, George, worked at Google and Twitter as a data analytics engineering team manager, and then got into this through kind of the permaculture world, and was really fascinated by how he might be able to apply data to farming and ranching. And then our sales teams, more traditional, like graduated from Chico with animal science degrees, worked for Grassland LLC, helped do holistic grazing planning for a number of ranches.
Yeah, sure. So what was the experience like, or I guess maybe with some of those more traditional backgrounds, how was that experience of going through that as a team, and how has it helped? Or, you guys are just a couple of weeks out from it, but how have you guys been processing some of that experience, I guess?
I think it's helpful because our customer base is generally a pretty advanced group. that is already in the weeds with their data and is already thinking about things from a very adaptive perspective and know what their animal days per acre is. They're managing their stocking really carefully. Like Brock and Heidi Terrell, I think, have been on your podcast. They are using PastureMap like every day to look at their ADAs because they know what to do with that data. And it was eye-opening to look at other operations who are just beginning to explore that, right? And the level of business mindset, everybody is running a business, but then knowing what metrics to look at and having the guidance from Dallas and Dave on what they should look at as their biggest cost is really important. So, we had originally thought of ourselves as, hey, we're going to help ranch managers run their business from their phone, from their pocket, but really it reinforced our focus is feed and forage management because that's the biggest driver of profitability. And that is something that we have. That's kind of what we put our stake in the ground on. It was always been a pasture management application, but I think it's been doubly reinforced now. Hey, if we can help ranchers manage their pastures and grazing more tightly, they can check their pastures and we help them match their stocking rate to carrying capacity and help them and their staff be in the flow of that data. That's really going to make a big difference for their profitability.
So are you saying that previous to this reinforcement, there might have been some mission creep at PastureMap? Is that similar to, is that what you're saying?
I think we're very customer focused, right? And the life of a rancher is, when you think about what's in their head at any given point, there's like 20, 30 things going on at the same time, right? And so it's hard not to be yanked around and okay, I need to check on the animals. Okay, you need to have performance, you need to do this, EIDs. But what Ranching for Profit really helped us solidify is how folks should be thinking about their businesses. So planning is not enough. You should be looking at the data. You should be thinking about the profitability of different enterprises. And it kind of gives us more confidence too. I think the most successful producers that we've seen are not scared of the data. And it's an emotional process, right? And I have lots of empathy for this because watching people look at their livelihoods and having to make some really tough decisions about how they're going to take their business and what direction they're going to take their family in. But I think from the outside world, having worked at other businesses in analytics, the best run businesses live in the flow of the data. And so I think people who confront what their plan is, but also how far the actuals are compared to their plan, are the people who have power to do something about it. And those are tough decisions that I really respect, that I saw producers making, and our goal is to help surface those decisions more clearly.
So how is PastureMap serving ranchers? How are you guys going about? How do you look at that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as I said before, our focus is helping ranchers manage their feed and forage management and basically their grazing management more tightly. So from the beginning of checking pastures, you take your phone out, and with PastureMap, you can map out your subdivisions, regardless of whether you're doing rotational or you're really adaptive or you're just starting to think about cross fencing. Check your pastures, take your pasture inventory, take a photo, and then we have a stocking calculator that helps you match the stocking rate to carrying capacity. And that's like critical grazing math that you have to do, right? And it has to be variable throughout the season because your grass is not the same. So from there, we also surface rest days. So as you move your herd through, we show you the rest days. So we're basically delivering the data in a way that hopefully is not scary, right? Just make your pastures, move your cows, and then we're just going to show you some numbers, okay? Like, you're going to see the numbers of what your rest days are, and then we're also going to show you how many animal days per acre or stock days per acre you're actually getting off of your land. Because when we looked at grazing management, and I think the grazing planning chart is an excellent tool, right? People still do it, on a board with their whole team, laminated chart, that's great. Where we saw a gap was people would make a plan, and then they would just kind of be like, okay, I've done the grazing planning for the year, and I'm just going to go do the cows now, right? And that's not fully capturing what the grazing plan's intention was, which is it should be a living document. So your grazing management should be happening throughout the season as you move animals, figuring out how much you're actually harvesting off in terms of stock days per acre, and then comparing that to what your pasture inventory was is really where the power is, right? So you're making yourself a better grazing manager in terms of assessing your forage, and also forecasting forward in the season of how well are you gaining, how how are the cattle looking? How's the grass looking? What day when am I going to run out of forage? Those are scary, right? Because there's uncertainty involved with it. Yeah, I think the folks who are able to make a decision that actually impacts the profitability for the season are the ones who aren't afraid to confront that data and see how far they might be off. And then that means that and sometimes it's your staff, right? Sometimes the staff that's moving and they graze too short. Just having a habit of being in the flow of looking at the data and looking at the photos makes it possible for producers to make the critical decisions before it's too late.
So you mentioned that the best run businesses are the ones that live in the flow of the data. Are those businesses that are able to analyze the data and adapt to it? Is that why they are the best run businesses?
I mean, I think so. I'm biased, but just like you, but my form of radicalism is I'm a really big data nerd, and I think that data can tell us a lot. And there's no substance. We're not saying like run your business from your phone and never go out and walk the pastures, right? You've got to walk the pastures. But data keeps us honest about how we're doing, right? It can be a sunny spring day and things look really great, but it's got to stop raining at some point, and got to know how much stockpile you're aiming for. And I mean, there are folks who are doing that. Like I mentioned, Heidi and Brock Terrell, they see the ADAs, they get on the same page with their staff members. They also look at the animal performance. We help you forecast the average daily gains. And then you're honest with yourself. Am I getting the gains that I need? And then can we respond to this before problems get big?
Yeah. And how do you guys go about measuring the stock days through the app? Is there some data that's input by the rancher and that's helping to forecast that?
Yep. It's all data from the rancher. Just think of us as an easier tool to calculate things. Right? So we're a grazing calculator with a bunch of bells and whistles. So producers will put in, depending on your different enterprises, what the average daily gain is or what the forage consumption is as a percentage of their body weight. And then as they forecast gains, the program actually adds weight to the animals. And then for different life stages, you can change that. And then every time that they move on the pastures, so it just looks like cows on a map. So it's not scary, but you just like move cows around on a map, but in the background, we're crunching the numbers on how much forage was consumed based on their daily requirements. And then we do the further math and turn that into standard animal days. And then we divide it by acres, and then we show you animal days per acre. So it's all the math that you don't want to do at night at like 9 p.m. once you get home is done for you.
And the biggest factor in that, or one of the bigger factors, is the amount of moisture. So there's some way of measuring that and inputting that into the system, and then you guys are using that for your math on the back end?
Totally. So there's rainfall. I mean, you make a plan for how much you're going to grow in forage, and then it rains and the plan goes out the window. So all sorts of things are going to happen in the season. There could be drought, there could be wildfire, like God forbid, rain. Just on a normal year, rain could come at the wrong time, too much or too little. Last year here in California, we had couple 80-degree days in the first 2 months of the season, and then all the grass started to head out really early. And you have to keep adapting and replanning. So there's a couple of things that PastureMap does. One is there's a digital grazing chart. We make it really easy to keep up with your grazing plan. You put your plan in at the beginning of the season, and then all of your grazing moves actually just like fill in as actual, so you don't have to do any of that work. And then you can track how rainfall. So the other piece of it is we have rainfall, where you can put in from a rain gauge or from a NOAA station, but rain gauges are more accurate, like how much rainfall you're getting cumulatively and where did it come. And then using those two tools, you can be adapting and replanning in the season, which is often really difficult for folks when they're in the thick of things.
Yeah, and that adaptability is the big one that I think early on in the Working Cows podcast, we kept hitting that idea of adaptability. And I think that the unique tool that PastureMap is a tool that gives you data that allows you to adapt in the season, not wish you would have done something different or later on.
Yeah. I mean, give you an extreme example. One of our favorite customers, one of our earliest customers, Brian Alexander, who ranches near Medicine Lodge in South Kansas. A couple of years ago, in 2016, there was a really big wildfire. and all 7,000 acres of his ranch burned in the middle of wildfire season. And so, I mean, that's a big readjustment that he had to do. And what happens when we talk to folks is, depending on the landowner, their family actually owns the land, but often people are afraid to get back on the pasture too soon. Right? They're like, okay, we have to fully destock, but then rain will come inevitably, and then there will be carrying capacity. So planning out and then monitoring how soon the grass comes back, depending on how soon it rains, and then how much regrowth is there, because it's just like you've reset to a new normal that's not what you've expected before. So he used PastureMap to monitor the pasture inventory in each of his pastures, and he actually got back on with other people's cows. And that was really meaningful to me personally. I never expected that. I just wanted to help ranchers track better data. Helping someone recover from a wildfire, especially a customer who's become a personal friend, was really meaningful to me.
Very, very good. What about, so your history? You are a Stanford MBA grad. You've got an MBA from Stanford. And I heard one of your other appearances on another podcast. I listened to, I think, every podcast that you appeared on the last couple of days just to get ready for this, and try not to ask you all the same questions you've been asked before. But is there something to be said for the fact that Stanford doesn't have a business school for ranchers? I mean, is it because there's no rancher that would attend a business school, or what does that look like in your mind? And can you speak to that?
Well, I think it's more about Stanford, not about ranchers. But like, no ranchers, period, which is a problem. I mean, not to plug Ranching for Profit too much, but is basically the best business school for ranchers. But I do think there's something to I'm a fan of the podcast, and I think there's a lot to the point that you and other guests on this podcast have made about running the ranching business like a business. And yeah, it's a family business, so it's even more complicated, and there should be more processes and more structures in place for man. And then actually, there's way more uncertainty, right? So in my prior life, as a data analytics person, I worked as a consultant in like factories and sales organizations, and those are pretty regular. You just got inputs and outputs, and you've got data to track all of that. There's no rain, there's no hail, there's not a hugely volatile cattle market. So because ranching is so complex, and you're dealing with at minimum 2 enterprises, cows, grass, right, and lots of external factors, why wouldn't we want to track our data more closely than businesses who can basically like buy steel whenever they want and just punch out widgets?
How are you guys? What's the future of PastureMap? What are some things that you guys are looking at that are exciting to you? Some things that you guys are thinking about in the future as far as new things you're rolling out and working on?
Yeah. So we've been in the market for a few years now. We launched in 2016. And one thing that keeps getting reinforced is that we have a big opportunity to help ranchers run better businesses, more efficient, more profitable. And the customers that are part of the PastureMap community have really been pulling on that. So can you help us figure out which enterprises are more profitable or not? Like it's been discussed on your podcast before, but it is often all mashed together. And one enterprise is subsidizing another. Land and cattle are maybe not separated. You're not actually charging the right amount to your land enterprise. So that's really powerful, right? There's like maybe half of your business is losing money, and maybe you could make a big decision that would change that. Maybe you would lease, or maybe you would just charge things differently, or get out of cow-calf. Maybe you should run stockers. Maybe you should contract graze. Those are difficult decisions. I understand, because like I think of the don't get too attached to your cows. Ranchers are my cows also. I really like, hopefully I don't offend anyone who's on your listening to your podcast, because the folks I know, the kinds of folks who listen to the Working Cows podcast are paradigm busters. But I think there are a bunch of paradigms about the way that we ranch that could be solved with just looking at data in a cleaner way. So we're working on that. We're working on like basic steps to profitability forecasting. So we already have gains and pasture forecasting on the grazing chart, but how do you tie that to dollars? And hopefully that doesn't scare away everybody, right? Tying it into dollars, tying it to profit per acre. At the very basic level, what we're trying to do this year is on the grazing chart, be able to add in some kind of forecast on when we think based on the stockpile that you have, what's your zero date? Like, what's your date that you're going to run out? And then if you have hay inventory, like if you're making decisions to supplement, I'm not trying to judge everyone, right? So actually people bale graze, so that's like very cool. But bringing in, when do you bring that in? How much does it cost? Like, put a dollar value to it. How much is each day of feeding out bales going to cost you? And compare that to the gains that you're getting. And is that actually a profitable decision? Each day, is that a profitable decision?
Totally. I'm a big fan of everything you just said, because the data, having better data in front of you, these are numbers that people can't necessarily argue with. It helps everybody make a less emotional decision, and it helps everybody look at the same numbers and see what they're saying and then make that decision that's best for the business, which ultimately is best for the family, because don't have the stress of finances and all those other things. So those are some huge pieces that you guys are doing. One of the biggest paradigms, and I think you glossed right over it, is the idea of separating your cows from your grass, that you actually have two enterprises on every ranch, and all the land that you control, there's a grass enterprise there that could be used differently. So how do you see that being used by people that are using PastureMap?
That's a huge one. And I think it's one that lots of folks are still subsidizing their cattle operation with free grass, right? Grass is not free. Let's just be like, even if it comes, it's not free, because there's an opportunity cost that you could be charging somebody else to run cows on your land. So at minimum, there's an opportunity cost there. We're noodling on how to do that and how to explain that concept. But Aaron Berger has a great model on that. Aaron's on our podcast as well. He's been advising us on, well, why don't we just at minimum say, put in a dollar value for the cost of one animal unit day? And I think if we can spread that practice of, well, what does it cost to actually run one cow for one day standard animal unit? And then at least charge that to your land enterprise. That's a good start.
Absolutely. Can you share a little bit of kind of the diversity of your use cases, the people that are using PastureMap? Can you share a little bit of the diversity of the use cases that you guys are seeing? I know that, and just tell people, because I've like I said, I've listened to everything that's been produced for you online, and so I've heard a lot of these things, and it's really fascinating to me. Can you just talk about the global reach of PastureMap?
Yeah, we went deep here on profitability because that's what I'm really excited about right now. I think it's going to make the biggest difference because, like you said, running good businesses is going to actually help ranching sustain itself as an industry, right? Successful businesses is going to make it possible for the next generation to actually do this. But there are like, maybe we've lost some listeners who are like, whoa, it's like way too much. I don't need all of these ADAs and AMs and all that. So on the very basic level, just mapping fencing. A bunch of people use PastureMap just to plan out fencing, just to put in gates, and be able to share that with other folks. Even the really advanced adaptive grazing managers like Birdwell and Clark Ranch in Texas use it as an educational tool they host tours all the time. So being able to show people, like, if you can't get out to see the big herd, here are all the pastures, here's what we've done. And a couple of universities as well, Colorado State University, their extension team uses PastureMap as a teaching tool. And then being able to see what they're doing and keeping track of they're doing cover crop grazing trials under pivot, which is very cool. And so there's a research application to it. There's a sharing with your team application. There are the team, Joe Morris's team at Morris Grassfed here in San Juan Bautista uses it just to communicate tools around. And they also do grazing planning, but they're using it to communicate, like dropping a point and a photo in the middle of the field when you see like fence line is down or a tree is on the fence or there's pipe that needs fixing. And then that goes to everyone's phones so they can get back to the same place with the right equipment, and that saves a bunch of time. It also helps if you have some like irrigation specialist out there and you can just send them on their way with an iPad.
Just a quick break here from our discussion with Christine to share with you my entry into the My Roadcast contest. Here it is. Your farting cows have drawn the attention of those whose main concern is protecting the environment. What are you going to do about that? Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast. We in the ranching industry are faced with some opportunities. Some people might say they're challenges, but I think they're opportunities. And the first opportunity that we have is to change our management practices. That's good news. It's something that we can control. The first thing that we can do is that we can increase the rest period that we give our pastures. We can graze smaller areas of land for shorter periods of time and stay away from them for longer periods of time, up to a year or more. If we do that, the root masses of those grasses will be increased, and that will become a carbon pump, sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, kicking off the soil life, and continuing to sequester more and more carbon out of the atmosphere. The second opportunity that we have is to change our network to include different allies. So what we're going to do over the next few weeks on the Working Cows podcast is we're going to talk to people who've been down this road before us, people who have faced similar questions about their industry, and we're going to talk to them about the allies that they found very helpful in giving good answers to those questions that were coming at their industry about whether or not their stewardship and management practices were actually the best thing for the environment, for the climate, for the planet. So I would encourage you to tune in over the next few weeks to workingcows.net and check out these episodes with these people who've been down this road ahead of us, who can help us to find new allies. So please head over to workingcows.net/vote and cast your vote for the Working Cows podcast. Now back to more of my conversation with Christine Sue of PastureMap.
What about your international users? Can you talk a little bit about some of the people that are outside the U.S. and how their use of it? Just give us an idea of the scope.
Sure. We currently have a group that's trying it out in Argentina that is, they're testing out regenerative grazing. So that's very exciting. So it's an interesting use case when you're just setting up cross fencing and you're using it for land planning and water infrastructure planning. That's one group. We have another group in South Africa, a collaboration with Conservation International, that is using it for achieving conservation, like brush clearing and tracking what they're doing. They're kind of more nomadic herders, so they herd in a group at night. And so it's kind of the opposite of what we do here during the day. So that's been fun. But basically, they use that to qualify for conservation and wildlife friendly beef program that they're in, and that beef program has generated over $1 million this year directly to herders who make less than $1 a day. So that's it's awesome that we can be part of that kind of impact.
Very cool. You talked about some of your favorite use cases, the fire example being one. Can you talk about how PastureMap has helped people change their businesses? Have there been people who have made like a drastic change in their business model as a result of the data they've been getting from PastureMap and coming online with some of these things?
Think about that. I do know folks who have made business decisions based on it, like sell their heifers early or later because you're seeing that it's not profitable to keep them longer. Derek Schwanenbeck is probably a good example. He figures that being able to keep his ADAs on track, like showing how many ADAs he can get out of land, is going to help him win more leases. So that's an expansion. Yeah. I mean, just being you're ultimately the business owner is the decision maker, right? It's not going to be because of PastureMap, but it's because you saw the data and then you weighed the options and then you made an informed decision rather than trying to keep just going the way it's always been done.
But you're serving them with that better data, and we appreciate that. I was blown away the first time I sat down with PastureMap, just how easy it was to use, how easy it was to draw pastures, how easy it was to see where the fence lines were and draw around there. So you guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks. That means a lot. Thank you.
One of the things that is interesting to me is the way that PastureMap can serve ranchers with the traceability piece and being able to trace, pasture to plate, kind of that animal, and how is it serving ranchers in those ways?
Well, you can use EIDs. So there's more and more ranchers now that are implementing EIDs. And I know like that's sensitive. Some people don't want to do it. I'm not telling you have to do EIDs or where I couldn't forecast where the market in the US is going to go. But we are seeing more people who do electronic ear tagging. And so usually those are Australian, New Zealand WANs. And so they export into a CSV or an Excel file, and then you can just we are compatible with any kind of EID reader. So there have been more in the past year or so of our customers requesting that they just send us their EID outputs, and then we update the weights. But I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think that you can try to time your program to other certifications or incentives. We haven't talked about soil carbon, but like that's, our pre-discussion was talking about methane. Like I don't have super strong opinions I don't have a crystal ball about where all that's going to go. I think generally we think of it as a nice to have, like, hey, if someone's willing to pay you a premium for doing this or having this data, that's great. But if your fundamental business isn't profitable, you're not going to survive. And I'm much more interested in your fundamental business the numbers being profitable. So where I think EIDs are useful is that there are more and more portable scales that are coming down in cost. And I think that's fun because if it doesn't create too much stress on the animals, like for example, you put it on near the water trough or as you're moving between corrals, which is how I think a couple people have it if they were going to work them anyway. And that actually gives you another data point on your entire herd during the season on how they're performing. And then based on that, you can make decisions on which animals' genetics are good or bad, or which ones are performing well or not. And that's additional data that you can use to make every cow work for you.
I like the sounds of that.
Yeah.
Very good. Why does the work that PastureMap is doing matter to your team? I mean, you talk about walking into a room of 300 cowboy hats at your first grazing conference and that being intimidating for you and these people welcoming you in. But what is it that draws the people that are working at PastureMap into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of different personal motivations, but we're unified by our mission statement. So our mission statement is to help ranchers make profits building healthy grasslands. And that's a dual mission, right? We care a lot about ranchers being profitable, and we think that ranchers being profitable is the best way to build healthy grasslands. And the motivations range from, like, a couple of our developers grew up on farms, not in ranching, but agriculture is very close to their heart. And with their skill set, they really want to contribute. I talked about my co-founder, George, really caring. Before joining PastureMap, he was just like out there building data tools using USDA's free data sets. Like he just really wants to help farmers because he's very plugged into the local food system. And then for our sales reps, they're from this, they have 10 years of experience in ranching. They really care about some of the practices that they see that could benefit the industry. And our chief designer quit like a pretty high paying job at Turner Media. And I was like, oh, hopefully eventually we'll work with Turner's Ranches instead. But he basically moved out of Atlanta and started a homestead in South Carolina and raises goats like Salatin style. And like, he's out there moving fence and then using PastureMap and then just like iterating on the designs himself. So it's pretty personal for all of us.
Very cool. Yeah, you mentioned other species. We think of pasture. I'm in Western South Dakota. This is the Working Cows podcast. What about other species, and how are they? Maybe are they using it in different ways or unique ways, or is it pretty similar? Or what are some of those things like?
Yeah, we have a couple folks who are, probably more than a couple, who use it for their sheep flock, and a lot of multi-species is becoming more popular, right? Because you got to match the animal to what you've got. And sometimes you've got forbs and sometimes you have brush, and there are smaller critters that are better for taking that down. And you can do that in PastureMap. So, yeah.
That's next week's episode, multi-species grazing. Honestly, I just finished recording
Is
it,
it?
so yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Well, yeah, multi-species is just I know there's like emotions around different, like I'm a cattle person, but if we could just plug, it sounds like when we saw the numbers, more and more people are doing multi-species and getting into sheep or looking at considering sheep and goats,
sure.
because again, it makes business sense if you've got standing forage and you're capturing solar energy and there's just stuff out there that you could turn into money. Why wouldn't you want to turn it into money?
So a couple things. First of all, Cody Creelman has been a guest on the Working Cows podcast. He's going to come back on again, and we're going to talk about, actually, we're going to talk about castration, believe it or not. But anyways, we're going to talk about that with him. And I told him that, or he was listening to my episode as we were conversing, and he came to the part where I talked about sheep, and he's like, "Oh, never mind, I'm out. I can't do the podcast anymore. You're talking about sheep." But then the other thing I wanted to say is, in just a preview of next week's episode, a little teaser to get people in on it. We were talking about one sheep producing about I think it was like $80 to $90 of overhead each sheep. Has that much profit built into it between the wool and the meat. And then you can run, in some cases, conservatively 5 sheep to a cow, and in some cases 9 sheep to a cow. Then you start looking at that and the benefit of stacking those enterprises, and you're talking about huge opportunities that I think another $810 per animal unit being left on the table for some of these places would just be a huge deal. We were talking about $25,000 net just on the sheep enterprise. That's what some ranches are netting per year anyways. And I just think there's a big opportunity there. And so
there's huge opportunity, and even getting, like you said, there's 2 different enterprises right off of the back of each critter, right? So there's 2 revenue streams. They are not necessarily correlated with each other. So that's built-in hedging right there. The wool clip, like actually you store it. There are different partnerships that people have, but like it doesn't have to be fresh, right? It can like last in inventory for quite long. So whoever you partner with may have the opportunity to play the market for longer period of time. And then some folks I know are direct marketing, and they're in like, I won't share who, but like the numbers are like 5 times as much profit. Like it is. So like what, again, coming back to, I understand the emotions of like it, because it gets to identity of who you are. And like, we've thought about this, right? Because we're like, okay, like we serve ranchers, sometimes dairy people call us and they're like, we want to use PastureMap. Do we serve dairies? Sure. Because it's, for a producer, what is it worth to, I don't know, what is it worth to like, people think you're weird at the coffee shop anyway, probably, if you listen to the Working Cows podcast. What is it worth? Like, they're not looking at your bank account. And, like, and there are folks who are just like, I don't care what they say.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
I'll see the check. Yeah.
No, we don't want to do it the way everybody else is doing it. We want to find a way to, like you said, if really the bottom line mission statement is to improve profits by improving grasslands. I know I don't have that exactly right, but whatever happens, whatever it takes to get to that end, let's do it. If it's another animal enterprise, if it's, I've got time to do cows, I don't have time to do sheep, find somebody who wants to get started and bring them in, let them do sheep on your place, and charge them some lease grass for it, and they won't take anything from the cows, or you can budget that in. So I just think it's a really cool opportunity that I think is being left on the table. It's actually the way that my wife and I are looking at getting into the industry. So
nice.
My dad always says,
our team too.
Yeah. My dad always says there isn't a ranch north of Belle-Fourche that wasn't paid for with sheep. And the more I get out into the actual prairies of western South Dakota, away from the Black Hills, the more I realize that's pretty much true everywhere in western South Dakota. All these places were paid for with sheep. They've been driven out in the last 20 years by coyotes, but hopefully we're getting some good dogs that are helping with that and giving opportunities. So I'm sorry.
It's still a niche. No, we're like way off. It's fine. I mean, it's still a niche. And there are people who are still really open to sharing how they're doing it. a couple of folks I know doing it are using Peruvian herders who you can get on a special visa, and you set them up with a trailer, and that is really helpful. Heidi Terrell, Brock Terrell do that. A couple other folks in the Dakotas.
Yeah, I know that some people figure they can pay for a herder to live with the sheep year round as long as they've got 1,000 sheep per herder, basically, and that equates to about 200 cows on the low end. And so, really, that's not that big of an operation when you start to think about it. And there's a lot of people doing it, and it's a cool deal. So, anyways, back to PastureMap.
I was going to say Sage and Faith Askin are also doing it, and then there's risks and there's a learning curve, right? But he's really a wonderful young producer couple that are really open with sharing their knowledge.
Yeah, so talk about that. Talk about some of the mentorship piece that's built into PastureMap and how you guys are facilitating regional knowledge sharing and some of that stuff.
Sure. It really comes back to us being grateful for the mentorship that we've had. I'd be remiss if I didn't name Dr. Alan Williams, who I met at the Grass-Fed Exchange. Like the first conference I went to was the Grass-Fed Exchange. So, I fell into this crowd right away. And Neil Dennis, who passed earlier, a few months ago up in Saskatchewan, who was really one of the pioneers of how to, he was just like jerry-rigging different kinds of adaptive grazing systems. And having folks who had 30, 40 years of doing this and all of their wisdom advise us on color coding was Neil Dennis's idea. It helped me really quickly ramp up knowledge that otherwise would have taken probably a decade or more. And then we're just trying to pay that forward. It is because I came in from the outside and not growing up on a ranch, there's just a lot to learn, right? So now I think that the next generation, folks wanting to get into it may be intimidated, or if you're thinking about different enterprises from the ones that your parents have always done, that's basically learning a new business, right? It's not like farming or ranching is all the same. If you're thinking about changing to cow-calf or changing this contract grazing or doing leases or sheep or whatever, that's a new business. And you have to start over with your budgets. You have to start over with figuring out what works, and then having advisors who have done it before really helps. So what we try to do is just target a few states every few months and participate in a bunch of the activities. So we did Colorado last year, and we just attended SRM meetings, holistic management workshops, field days, and really try to get to know folks. And then just because it's the right thing to do, connect people with customers that we know are already doing this in the region. So we're doing that in Nebraska. We do it in California a lot. The regional knowledge is the most relevant. You want to find somebody in your region, whether it's the Sand Hills or Black Hills or in Colorado on dry country. You want to find somebody who's doing what you're doing on the scale and knows the stocking rates and knows how to set up fence in your area. It's super different here in Rolling Hills to set up polywire than it is on flat prairie, right? So we often just when we get to know you, especially young folks who are just getting into it, we just refer them hey, we know who's doing this, and we know it because we know our customers pretty well.
So there's a lot more that I'd like to talk to you about. I want to respect your time. And so in order to respect your time, I'm going to throw some links to some other episodes that you appeared on in the show notes page at workingcows.net/73. And so there'll be a link to your appearance on Mountain and Prairie. There'll be a link to your appearance on Down to Earth. There'll be a link to your appearance on the Future of Agriculture. Those are the three that I listened to, I think. And I'll throw up your Grass-Fed Exchange talk as well, because there's some good stuff in there about running a regenerative business and a regenerative culture in your business, and some of that stuff that I think is really important for people to grab onto. But I want to wrap up today by giving you an opportunity to talk about the Grass-Fed Exchange coming up April 3rd through the 5th, and I know you've been super involved in that for this year's session. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Thanks. That's perfect. Yeah, so the Grass-Fed Exchange, as folks know, is one of the biggest national events that gathers people who are interested in grass-based, pasture-based production of livestock. And it's everywhere from cow-calf to direct marketing, but everyone who's interested in improving their skills. And it's a pretty advanced group that also is super open to mentorship. So I would encourage anyone who's listening who is considering coming, please come, because you'll meet people like Abe Brown, like Alan Williams, and Will Harris, who want to mentor and they want to share. And this is the conference that they go to do it. And the conference this year is in Santa Rosa, so it's wine country, not too difficult to imagine yourself going out and enjoying yourself. And the theme is Regeneration Rising. So it's an explicit focus on new and young producers and helping next generation producers be successful. So there's going to be multiple tracks for beginning grazing, like 101 basics, all the way through an advanced track for those who want to take their adaptive grazing to the next level. And then the pasture tours are also tiered like that, so people can choose what they're going to get the most out of. It's going to be a good time.
Very good. Yeah, it's really excellent stuff, and like you said, at least half, maybe 3/4 of the benefit of attending things like that is the networking opportunities that it presents. And so I couldn't agree more that it's a worthwhile investment of going, not just to hear experts talk at you, but to talk with people who are doing things and have been down the road and made the mistakes and those kinds of things. So
yeah, another story I'll share. One of my favorite things to do at conferences like Grass-Fed Exchange is just grab someone, like whether it's Will Harris, or just grab someone who I admire and then ask them to go on a walk around the conference, like skip a session and just go walk circles with them around the conference. And the conference organizer, I'm like actually plugging this, but no, you should do it, because we've created a lot of spaces. It's going to be at the Sonoma Fairgrounds, and the outside is like sunny and beautiful and has a lot of sitting areas, and we hope to see a lot of that cross-pollination happening, because I can't say enough about how quickly it'll accelerate your business to talk to someone who's run a business for 40 years, and then you just ask them the questions that are keeping you awake at night, and they know the answers. And then you gain a lot of knowledge in 40 minutes.
All right. So like I said, this is the episode 73, workingcows.net/73. Said some of the other links I'm going to have up there. What about PastureMap? How can people get more information? What link should I throw up there?
www.pasturemap.com.
Gotcha. And Grass-Fed Exchange?
www.grassfedexchange.com.
There we go. Very good. Christine, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Clay. Appreciate you.
Coming up next week, we're going to talk with Dave Olala about the benefits of multi-species grazing. I'm really excited about that. For now, check out workingcows.net/vote, and we will be forwarding that to the voting page as soon as that voting page is up. And we will see you next week with another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.